Miles, what did you do? Oh my god, that is so creepy. That is one possessed kid, but I don't know what movie that's for. That's so fascinating. Look at that's blue and white though too. That's not black and white. I don't know what the significance of that is, but it's fascinating. Okay, so I just saw Vice, and there's probably not much for me to say that, well, I feel like there's probably not much in it that most of us wouldn't know about Dick Cheney or wouldn't have surmised, but it was still really well done. I mean, it felt a little choppy and disjointed, but they had to go from 1963 to present day, so I guess that's one of those things where you can't really go, in chronological order necessarily, but some things about the film I found interesting. Oh, and I should say, there was a part of me thinking to myself, wouldn't that be weird if I found some reality residue? Like when Dick Cheney was plotting his points to go into Iraq, they showed the Chevron logo, and I thought, oh my god, wouldn't it be weird if red was on top? But it wasn't, so alas, no Mandela effect reality residue in this film. But I thought it was really interesting, I will say the portrayed dynamic. And of course, everything is portrayed in this. I'm not taking it as absolute truth or anything like that. It's obviously all an interpretation of the truth, just like most things. Most things cinematic, and even most things on YouTube. Portrayals of the truth. But Dick Cheney and his wife, oh my gosh, his wife was like so... She essentially made him, like she whipped him into shape. He was a drinker and he drank his way through college, and she was just like, you were gonna wipe the puke off your chin and you were gonna go out and do what I cannot do in this world because I'm a woman and I cannot do that yet, but I will, da 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 da. You're gonna raise your way to the top, boy. And she's just like, so many men could have me and I'm with you, and why am I with you? And he just looks at her and he goes, I love you, Lenny. But the dynamic was sort of portrayed in the sense that, or the reason that she was portrayed as being that way is that her mother and father had the opposite dynamic. Like, her father would come home drunk and beat her mother, and her mother would just sit there submissively. So that was kind of an interesting portrayal and take on things. But he's a war criminal, we all know it, violating several provisions of the Geneva Convention, and that was brought up too. The casting was impeccable. Just Christian Bale, man. Oh my god, talk about taking method acting to extremes. I mean, I do not think he was wearing a fat suit. I think he really gained weight, because that's hard to emulate. Like, you can usually tell if someone's wearing a fat suit. But just the voice, just how everybody got the vocal patterns down. Steve Carell as Donald Rumsfeld. He didn't get the voice down as well. Steve Carell sounded like Steve Carell, and his nose was too big, because if you'll notice, Donald Rumsfeld had kind of a small, weeny little nose. But Donald Rumsfeld, something I always found so funny about Donald Rumsfeld is whenever he would stand and make speeches, his voice just always sounded so gentle, like he was reading you a Winnie the Pooh story. Like, I just always imagined him reading us a Winnie the Pooh story, and I know that nothing could be more contrapuntal from the truth, but but Steve Carell is great. Like, I love Steve Carell's acting, but he was probably the least like the character. Although the weird thing was that there was one scene when they were all sitting in the Oval Office, and Steve Carell was lit from below, and there's a certain vein that pops out in his forehead, just like Donald Rumsfeld, and he looked so much like Donald Rumsfeld being lit from below. Like, lighting is so key in film, in certain instances. Oh, but the crazy thing was, okay, so Sam Rockwell looked and sounded, especially when he was lit, certain ways. I think from the left-hand side, he looked and sounded so much like George W. Bush. And the kicker was, like, the real kicker was that I couldn't believe until the end, was that the guy who played Colin Powell, I didn't even know it was him until I saw the end credits, was Tyler Perry, and he looked and sounded so much like Colin Powell. They kind of skimmed over 9/11 just a little bit for my taste, but, you're dealing with all those years. Oh, but the creepiest thing was how he got his heart transplant, and I'm not going to give away any spoilers about that, but that was creepy, like along the realm of blood sacrificing kind of thing. So there was that, but that was a surprise. And then one of the last things that I thought was kind of really unsettling, and I guess this is a little bit of a spoiler alert, was that when they were giving Dick Cheney his heart transplant, the lights just dimmed. When they were giving Dick Cheney his heart transplant, there was the scene where the new heart was sitting on this metal slab table while they were cutting up Dick Cheney in the background, and it was this total close-up, and I swear to God, there was an eye in that heart, a teeny little eye. It looked like a Mr. Potato Head heart. It was really, really creepy. So that's really the only spoiler alert. But there's not really too many spoilers because it is based more or less on reality. But you know what I think? And I'm sorry, I'm going to get a little bit political here. Everybody says we live in a democracy, and I know this isn't the most original thought in the world because I know I'm not the first to express this, but we don't live in a democracy. We live in a corporatocracy. I blame corporations and corporate interests on pretty much most, if not all, the wars that we fight, and just all the carnage and unfairness and everything. And I'm not saying that business is a bad thing, but if the business gets too big and if it starts dictating our politics, that's a bad thing. I mean, to me, my ideal, I guess, shape and scope of government would be that if our politicians truly were civil servants, public servants, and if they were paid no more than college professors, you know, who knows, but that'll never happen. I mean, corporations run the world. All right, I guess I don't have too much else to say, but anyway, it's definitely a movie worth watching, but I've got to go back and watch it again because I get so distracted when I watch movies about certain points in history, especially points in history for which I was around. I'll be like, I remember that. And then especially if it goes into the 80s, I'm like, oh my God, the 80s, those hairstyles, this, that, blah, blah, blah. I remember this, I remember that. And then I'll be thinking about my own take on the 80s when I'm supposed to be watching the filmmaker's interpretation of the 80s, and then I just feel like I'm being self-absorbed, but that's okay because I'll go back and I'll watch it again. Anyway, that's about all. If you guys have seen this movie, I would definitely love to hear your thoughts on it. And that, it's late. I'm gonna go, and peace out.